Maria was crying and begging her stepmother in the corner of the kitchen. Her small body was shaking as she held a mop that was too big for her tiny hands. The woman standing over her had angry eyes and a mean voice. "If you don't clean this floor right now, I'll get rid of you just like I get rid of your useless mother," the woman screamed. This woman was supposed to be Maria's new mommy. Her name was Veronica, and Maria's father had gotten engaged to her just 6 months ago. But Veronica was nothing like Maria's real mother. She was cruel and scary. But what happened next would change Maria's life forever, in ways no one could have imagined. Hello everyone, welcome to our story. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Many years ago there were two little girls who lived in the same neighborhood. Their names were Grace and Veronica, and they were the best of friends. They did everything together, they walked to school together, they played together after school, and they even shared their lunch money when one of them forgot theirs at home. Grace had a kind heart and a beautiful smile. She was the type of person who would share her last piece of candy with you, even if she was very hungry. Everyone in their neighborhood loved Grace because she was always helpful and never said mean things about anyone. Veronica, on the other hand, was different. She was smart and pretty, but she had a jealous heart. Even as a little girl, she didn't like it when Grace got more attention than she did. When their teacher praised Grace for her good work, Veronica would feel angry inside. When other kids wanted to play with Grace more than with her, Veronica would feel hurt and mad. But Grace never noticed these bad feelings in her best friend. She loved Veronica like a sister and always made sure to include her in everything. As the years went by, the two girls grew up together. They went to the same high school and even applied to the same college. Grace studied to become a nurse because she wanted to help sick people get better. Veronica studied business because she wanted to make lots of money and be important. During their college years, something happened that would change everything. Grace met a young man named Victor. Victor was different from all the other boys they knew. He was tall and handsome, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. But what made Victor really special was not just his good looks. It was his big heart and the way he treated people with respect. Victor came from a wealthy family. His father owned several businesses in the city, and his mother was a respected teacher. But Victor was not proud or mean like some rich people can be. He was humble and caring, always ready to help others. The first time Grace saw Victor was in the college library. She was studying for a big test when she dropped all her books on the floor. The books scattered everywhere, and Grace felt embarrassed as other students looked at her. "Let me help you," said a gentle voice. Grace looked up and saw the most handsome young man she had ever seen. He was already picking up her books with a warm smile on his face. "Thank you so much," Grace said, feeling her cheeks turn red. "My name is Victor," he said as he handed her the last book. "And you are?" "I'm Grace," she replied shyly. From that day on, Victor and Grace became friends. Victor would wait for Grace after her classes, and they would walk around the college campus together, talking about their dreams and future plans. Veronica watched all of this happening, and a dark feeling grew in her heart. She had never seen Grace so happy before, and it made her very jealous. Veronica had always been the center of attention when they were growing up, but now Grace had found someone special, and Veronica felt left out. "Grace spends all her time with that Victor boy now," Veronica complained to herself. "She barely has time for me anymore." But Grace didn't know about Veronica's jealous feelings. Whenever Grace talked about Victor, her face would light up with joy, and she would tell Veronica all about the sweet things Victor did for her. "He brought me gifts yesterday," Grace would say with a big smile. "And he wrote me a beautiful letter telling me how much I mean to him." Every word Grace said about Victor was like a knife in Veronica's heart. She would smile and pretend to be happy for her best friend, but inside she was burning with jealousy. As months passed, Victor and Grace fell deeply in love. Victor treated Grace like she was the most precious thing in the world. He would surprise her with small gifts, take her to nice restaurants, and always make sure she felt safe and loved. One evening, Victor took Grace to a beautiful park where they used to walk together. The sun was setting and the sky was painted with pretty colors of orange and pink. Grace thought they were just going for their usual evening walk. But Victor had planned something very special. He stopped walking and turned to face Grace. Then, to her complete surprise, he got down on one knee and pulled out a small box. "Grace," Victor said, his voice shaking with emotion, "you have made me the happiest man in the world. I love your kind heart, your beautiful smile, and the way you care about everyone around you. Will you marry me?" He opened the box, and inside was the most beautiful ring Grace had ever seen. It sparkled like a tiny star in the evening light. Grace covered her mouth with her hands and tears of joy filled her eyes. "Yes," she cried. "Yes, Victor, I will marry you." Victor slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up to hug her. They were both crying happy tears as they held each other close. The next day, Grace ran to tell Veronica the exciting news. She was so happy that she didn't notice the look of pain that crossed Veronica's face when she saw the engagement ring. "Oh, Grace," Veronica said, forcing herself to smile, "I'm so happy for you." But deep inside, Veronica's heart was breaking into a million pieces. She felt like Victor should have chosen her instead of Grace. After all, wasn't she prettier? Wasn't she smarter? Why did Grace always get the good things in life? These dark thoughts began to grow in Veronica's mind like poisonous weeds. That night, Veronica lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about Victor and Grace together, and it made her feel sick to her stomach. "It's not fair," she whispered to herself in the dark. "I've been Grace's best friend since we were children. I know her better than anyone. Why didn't Victor choose me?" From that day forward, Veronica began to watch Victor very carefully. She studied the way he looked at Grace, the way he held her hand, and the way he made her laugh. She memorized everything about him, his favorite foods, his hobbies, and even the cologne he wore. Meanwhile, Victor's wealthy family welcomed Grace with open arms. Victor's mother, Mrs. Johnson, was a kind woman who immediately loved Grace like her own daughter. "Victor has chosen well," Mrs. Johnson told her husband. "Grace is a sweet girl with a good heart. She will make our son very happy." Victor's father, Mr. Johnson, agreed. "She comes from a humble family, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that she loves our son for who he is, not for his money." The Johnson family decided to give Victor and Grace the wedding of their dreams. They rented the most beautiful church in the city and hired the best wedding planners money could buy. They wanted everyone to see how much they loved and accepted Grace into their family. Grace was overwhelmed by their kindness. She had grown up in a simple home where her family didn't have much money, but Victor's family made her feel like a princess. "I can't believe this is really happening," Grace told Veronica as they went shopping for her wedding dress. "Victor's family is so generous. They're even paying for our honeymoon trip to New York." Veronica smiled, but her hands were clenched into tight fists inside her pockets. "That's wonderful, Grace," she said through gritted teeth. "You're so lucky. And guess what?" Grace continued excitedly. "Victor asked me to choose my maid of honor, and of course I chose you. You're my best friend, and I can't imagine getting married without you standing beside me." Veronica's heart jumped. For a moment she felt a tiny bit of happiness. At least she would still be important to Grace on her wedding day. At least she would still have a special place. "Thank you, Grace," Veronica said, and this time her smile was real. "I would be honored to be your maid of honor." The next few months passed like a whirlwind. Grace was busy with wedding preparations, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, and picking out decorations. Veronica helped with everything, but each day her jealousy grew stronger. Every time Grace talked about her future life with Victor, Veronica felt like someone was stabbing her heart with a knife. Every time Grace showed her another wedding gift from Victor's family, Veronica wanted to scream. But she kept her feelings hidden. She smiled when Grace smiled, laughed when Grace laughed, and pretended to be the happiest maid of honor in the world. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The church was decorated with white roses and golden ribbons. Grace looked like an angel in her flowing white dress, and Victor looked handsome in his black suit. As Grace walked down the aisle on her father's arm, everyone in the church stood up and smiled. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as people watched the happy couple. Everyone except Veronica. Veronica stood at the altar wearing a pretty pink dress, holding Grace's bouquet and smiling for the cameras. But inside she was dying. Each word the pastor spoke felt like torture. "Do you, Victor, take Grace to be your wife?" the pastor asked. "I do," Victor said, looking into Grace's eyes with pure love. "Do you, Grace, take Victor to be your husband?" "I do," Grace replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor announced. Victor lifted Grace's veil and kissed her gently as the whole church erupted in cheers and applause. Rice and flower petals flew through the air as the newlyweds walked back down the aisle together. Veronica clapped and smiled with everyone else, but inside her heart, something cold and dark was growing. Something that would one day destroy everything Grace held dear. After the wedding reception ended and the last guests went home, Grace and Victor left for their honeymoon in New York City. The Johnson family had booked them a suite in one of the most expensive hotels in Manhattan, with a view of Central Park. For 2 weeks, Grace experienced a life she had only dreamed of. Victor took her to Broadway shows, fancy restaurants, and shopping on Fifth Avenue. They rode in carriages through Central Park and watched the sunset from the top of the Empire State Building. "I feel like I'm living in a fairy tale," Grace told Victor as they sat in their hotel room, looking out at the sparkling city lights. "This is just the beginning," Victor replied, holding her close. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you this happy." Meanwhile, back home, Veronica spent those 2 weeks in misery. Every day, Grace would call her and share stories about the amazing things she was doing in New York. "Victor bought me a beautiful necklace today," Grace would say. "And tomorrow we're going to see a famous Broadway musical. I wish you could see how incredible this city is." Each phone call made Veronica feel sicker. She would hang up and look at herself in the mirror, wondering why she wasn't the one living that dream life. When Grace and Victor returned from their honeymoon, they moved into a beautiful house that Victor's father had bought for them as a wedding gift. It was a large, elegant home with a big garden, marble floors, and expensive furniture. Veronica visited them often, always bringing gifts and wearing her biggest smile. But every time she walked through that beautiful house, she imagined herself living there instead of Grace. "Look at this kitchen," Grace would say excitedly, showing Veronica around. "And Victor surprised me with this piano in the living room because he knows I love to play music." "It's absolutely perfect," Veronica would reply, but inside she was thinking, "This should all be mine." A year after their marriage, Grace had the most wonderful news of all. "Veronica." Grace called, practically bursting with excitement when her friend came to visit. "I have something amazing to tell you." "What is it?" Veronica asked, though she had a sinking feeling in her stomach. "I'm pregnant," Grace announced, her face glowing with joy. "Victor and I are going to have a baby." Veronica felt like the world had stopped spinning. Grace was going to have Victor's baby. She was going to have the perfect family to go with her perfect house and perfect life. "Oh my goodness," Veronica exclaimed, forcing herself to hug Grace. "That's wonderful news." But that night, Veronica went home and cried until she had no tears left. The jealousy inside her had grown into something dark and poisonous. She began to have terrible thoughts, thoughts that scared even herself. 9 months later, little Maria was born. She was a beautiful baby with Grace's gentle eyes and Victor's strong chin. The entire Johnson family gathered at the hospital to welcome their new granddaughter and niece. Grace had never been happier. She held little Maria in her arms and felt like her heart might burst with love. "She's perfect," Victor whispered as he looked at his wife and daughter. "Just like her mother." When Veronica came to visit Grace and the baby in the hospital, she brought a big bouquet of flowers and a stuffed teddy bear. She smiled and cooed over the baby just like everyone else expected her to do. But as she looked at Grace holding Maria, surrounded by Victor and his loving family, something inside Veronica finally snapped. She couldn't take it anymore. Grace had everything: the husband, the house, the family, the money, the love. And what did Veronica have? Nothing. She was still single, still living in a small apartment, still watching her best friend live the life that should have been hers. That night, Veronica made a decision that would change everything. She was sitting alone in her apartment, staring at the hospital bracelet they had given her when she visited Grace. Suddenly, she picked up a pair of scissors and cut the bracelet off her wrist. "If I can't have the life I deserve," she said to herself in the darkness, "then maybe it's time to take it." But Veronica was smart. She knew she couldn't just take what she wanted by force. She would have to be patient. She would have to be clever. She would have to wait for the right moment. And most importantly, she would have to make everyone believe she was still Grace's loving, devoted best friend. The plan that began forming in Veronica's mind that night was so terrible, so cruel, that even she couldn't believe she was capable of thinking such thoughts. But the jealousy had poisoned her heart completely, turning her into someone she had never been before. Someone dangerous. Over the next few months, Veronica visited Grace and baby Maria almost every day. She brought gifts for the baby and helped Grace with household chores. She listened to Grace talk about her happiness and nodded and smiled as if she shared that joy. Victor's family thought Veronica was wonderful. "Grace is so lucky to have such a devoted friend," Mrs. Johnson often said. But late at night, when Veronica was alone, she would research things on her computer. Terrible things. Things about poisons that were hard to detect. Things about how to make someone sick slowly, so slowly that no one would suspect anything was wrong until it was too late. And as baby Maria grew bigger and more beautiful, and as Grace grew more radiant with motherhood, Veronica's plan grew more detailed and more deadly. She just needed to wait for the perfect opportunity. The opportunity came 6 months later in a way that Veronica never expected. It was a cold winter evening when Grace called Veronica, sobbing on the phone. "Veronica," Grace cried, "I don't know what to do. I feel so sad all the time. I can't sleep, I can't eat properly, and sometimes I feel like I'm not a good mother to Maria." Veronica's heart jumped. She had heard about this before. It was called postpartum depression. Many new mothers experience these terrible feelings after having a baby. "Oh, Grace," Veronica said, her voice full of fake concern. "You poor thing. This must be so hard for you." "Victor doesn't understand," Grace continued crying. "He tries to help, but he just tells me everything will be okay. But I don't feel okay. I feel lost and scared, and sometimes I think everyone would be better off without me." When Veronica heard these words, a terrible idea began forming in her mind. Grace was vulnerable. Grace was sad and confused. This was the perfect time to put her plan into action. "Grace, listen to me," Veronica said in her most caring voice. "You're not alone. I'm your best friend and I'm going to help you through this. Why don't I come and stay with you for a while? I can help with baby Maria and take care of the house while you rest and get better." Grace felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Would you really do that? But I don't want to be a burden." "Don't be silly," Veronica interrupted. "That's what best friends are for. I'll pack my bags and come over tomorrow." That night, Veronica could barely sleep. Not because she was worried about Grace, but because she was excited. Finally, she would be living in that beautiful house. Finally, she would be close to Victor every day. Finally, her plan could begin. The next morning, Victor wasn't sure about the idea when Grace told him. "Are you certain about this?" Victor asked his wife as they sat in their kitchen, baby Maria sleeping peacefully in her high chair. "Having someone live with us is a big decision." "Victor, I really need help right now," Grace pleaded. "Veronica has been my best friend since childhood. She knows me better than anyone and she's so good with Maria. Please, just for a few weeks until I feel stronger." Victor looked at his wife's tired eyes and pale face. He loved Grace so much and he wanted to do anything to help her feel better. "Okay," he said finally. "If you think it will help, then Veronica can stay with us. But only until you're feeling like yourself again." Grace hugged her husband tightly. "Thank you, Victor. You're the best husband in the world." If only Grace had known what she was inviting into her home. That afternoon, Veronica arrived with 2 large suitcases and the biggest smile anyone had ever seen. She hugged Grace and Victor, kissed baby Maria on the forehead, and admired every room in the house as if she was seeing it for the first time. "Thank you so much for letting me stay," Veronica said to Victor. "I promise I'll be helpful and won't get in your way." Victor nodded politely, though something about the way Veronica looked around his home made him a little uncomfortable. But Grace seemed so happy to have her friend there, so he pushed those feelings aside. That first week, Veronica was perfect. She cooked delicious meals, cleaned the house until it sparkled, and took care of baby Maria so that Grace could rest. She even gave Victor foot massages when he came home tired from work. "I told you she would be wonderful," Grace said to Victor one evening. "I already feel so much better having her here." Victor had to admit that Veronica was being very helpful. The house had never been so clean and Grace did seem happier and more relaxed. But what Victor and Grace didn't know was that during those first days, Veronica was studying them. She was learning their routines, their habits, and most importantly, their weaknesses. She noticed that Grace always drank a cup of herbal tea before bed. She noticed that Victor worked late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She noticed which foods Grace liked and which medicines were in their bathroom cabinet. And late at night, when everyone was asleep, Veronica would walk around the house, touching the expensive furniture and imagining herself as the lady of the house. "Soon," she would whisper to herself in the darkness. "Very soon all of this will be mine." After 2 weeks of being the perfect house guest, Veronica began phase 1 of her deadly plan. It started small. She began adding tiny amounts of a special powder to Grace's evening tea. The powder was something she had ordered online. It was supposed to be a natural supplement, but Veronica had researched exactly what would happen if someone took too much of it for too long. The powder was tasteless and colorless. Grace never suspected anything was wrong with her tea. She just thought Veronica had found a new, more relaxing blend of herbs. At first, the powder didn't seem to do anything. Grace continued to feel better with Veronica's help around the house. But after a few days, Grace began to feel tired again. More tired than before. "I don't understand," Grace told Veronica as she sat at the kitchen table, barely able to keep her eyes open even though it was only mid-afternoon. "I thought I was getting better, but now I feel so weak all the time." "Maybe you're just adjusting to being a new mother," Veronica said sweetly, while secretly adding a little more powder to Grace's teacup. "These things take time. Why don't you go rest and I'll take care of Maria and start dinner?" Grace nodded gratefully and went to lie down, never noticing the small smile that crossed Veronica's face as she watched her best friend struggle up the stairs. Each day Grace grew a little weaker. Each day Veronica increased the amount of powder just slightly. And each day Victor became more worried about his wife. "Maybe we should take you to see a doctor," Victor suggested one evening as Grace struggled to eat the dinner Veronica had prepared. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Veronica said quickly. "Grace just needs rest and good care. I've been reading about postpartum recovery and this is very normal. Too many doctor visits might just stress her out more." Victor looked uncertain, but Grace nodded in agreement. She trusted Veronica completely. What Grace didn't know was that her best friend was slowly causing her death. Over the next few weeks, Grace's condition got worse and worse. She lost weight rapidly, her beautiful hair began to fall out, and her skin became pale and sickly. She could barely lift baby Maria without feeling dizzy and weak. "I don't understand what's happening to me," Grace whispered to Victor one night as she lay in bed, too weak to even sit up properly. "I used to be so healthy and strong." Victor held his wife's thin hand and felt his heart breaking. The woman he loved was disappearing before his eyes, and no one could tell him why. "We're going to the hospital tomorrow," Victor decided. "I don't care what Veronica says about stress. Something is seriously wrong and we need answers." But when Victor told Veronica about his plan to take Grace to the hospital, she became very upset. "Victor, please think about this carefully," Veronica said, putting her hand on his arm. "Grace is already so anxious and depressed. Taking her to a hospital with all those tests and strange doctors will only make her feel worse. I've been taking such good care of her here at home." "But she's getting sicker, not better," Victor argued. "These things take time," Veronica insisted. "And look how well I've been managing everything else. The house is spotless, Maria is happy and healthy, and you've been able to focus on work without worrying about anything at home. Isn't that worth something?" Victor had to admit that Veronica had been incredibly helpful. She cooked his favorite meals, kept the house perfectly clean, and took excellent care of baby Maria. Without her, he didn't know how he would manage with Grace being so sick. "Maybe you're right," Victor said finally. "Let's wait a little longer and see if Grace improves." Veronica smiled sweetly, but inside she was celebrating. She had successfully convinced Victor to keep Grace away from doctors who might discover what was really making her sick. As the months passed, Grace became so weak that she could barely leave her bedroom. Veronica brought all her meals to her on a tray, meals that were always laced with more poison. "You're such a good friend," Grace would whisper weakly as Veronica helped her drink her medicine tea. "I don't know what I would do without you." "Don't worry about anything," Veronica would reply, fluffing Grace's pillows. "Just focus on getting better. I'll take care of everything else." But Veronica wasn't trying to help Grace get better. Every day she was making her sicker. During this time, Veronica also began working on the second part of her plan, getting closer to Victor. She would wait until Grace was sleeping, then she would sit with Victor in the living room, bringing him coffee and listening to his worries about his wife. "I'm so scared I'm going to lose her," Victor confessed to Veronica one evening. "I love Grace more than life itself. I don't know what I would do if something happened to her." "Don't think like that," Veronica said softly, sitting closer to Victor on the couch. "Grace is a fighter. And you're such a wonderful husband. She's lucky to have someone who cares about her so much." Veronica would place her hand on Victor's shoulder when he looked sad, or bring him his favorite dessert when he had a hard day at work. She was always there with a kind word and a caring gesture. Victor began to depend on Veronica more and more. When Grace was too sick to go to family dinners, Veronica would go with Victor instead. When Victor needed someone to talk to about his fears and worries, Veronica was always ready to listen. "You've been such a blessing to our family," Victor told Veronica one day. "I don't know how we would have survived this difficult time without you." Veronica's heart soared when she heard these words. Her plan was working perfectly. After 18 long months of causing Grace's suffering, Veronica decided it was time to finish what she had started. Grace had become so weak that she could barely speak above a whisper, and Victor was becoming desperate enough to consider taking her to specialists in other cities. Veronica couldn't risk a doctor discovering the truth. On a quiet Sunday morning in March, when Victor had gone to the grocery store and little Maria was taking her afternoon nap, Veronica prepared Grace's final cup of tea. This time, instead of just a small amount of powder, Veronica emptied almost the entire container into the teacup. She stirred it carefully, watching the deadly substance dissolve completely. "Grace," Veronica called softly as she entered the bedroom with the tray. "I brought your tea and some toast. You need to keep your strength up." Grace struggled to sit up in bed. She had lost so much weight that she looked like a ghost of her former self. Her once beautiful hair had fallen out in patches, and her skin was pale and almost transparent. "Thank you, Veronica," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're always so good to me." Veronica helped Grace hold the teacup with both hands because she was too weak to lift it alone. "Drink it all," Veronica urged gently. "It will help you feel better." Grace took small sips of the tea, trusting her best friend completely, never knowing that she was drinking her own death. Within an hour, Grace began having trouble breathing. Her heart started racing and she felt a terrible pain in her stomach. "Veronica," Grace gasped, "something's wrong? I feel. But before she could finish her sentence, Grace collapsed back onto her pillows, unconscious. Veronica sat beside the bed and watched as her childhood friend, the woman who had loved her like a sister, who had trusted her with her life, who had shared everything with her, slowly died. Grace Johnson died that evening at 7:43 p.m., with Veronica holding her hand and tears streaming down her face, tears that looked like grief to anyone watching, but were actually tears of relief. When Victor returned from the store and found his wife unconscious, he immediately called for an ambulance. But it was too late. The paramedics tried everything they could, but Grace was gone. "I'm so sorry, sir," the doctor told Victor at the hospital. "It appears your wife died of heart failure, likely brought on by the prolonged illness she'd been battling. Sometimes when the body is weakened for so long, the heart just can't take it anymore." Victor collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. His beautiful Grace, his beloved wife, the mother of his child, was gone forever. Veronica stood beside him, rubbing his back and offering tissues, playing the role of the grieving best friend perfectly. "She's not suffering anymore," Veronica whispered to Victor as he cried. "Grace is at peace now." But Victor's 4-year-old daughter Maria would never be at peace again. Because the woman who had just murdered her mother was now going to become her new caregiver. And Veronica's plan was only half complete. The funeral was held 3 days later at the same beautiful church where Grace and Victor had been married just 4 years earlier. The church was packed with friends, family, and neighbors who had loved Grace dearly. Victor sat in the front row, holding 4-year-old Maria on his lap. The little girl didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew her mommy was never coming home again. Veronica sat right beside them, dressed in a black dress and dabbing her eyes with tissues. To everyone watching, she looked like a devoted friend who was heartbroken over losing someone so dear to her. "Grace was like a sister to me," Veronica said through her tears when people came to offer their condolences. "I don't know how I'll go on without her." But inside, Veronica felt triumphant. The first part of her plan had worked perfectly. Grace was gone and no one suspected that she had been murdered. After the funeral, the Johnson family gathered at Victor's house. Mrs. Johnson, Victor's mother, was especially worried about her son and granddaughter. "Victor, you can't take care of Maria all by yourself while you're grieving," she said gently. "Why don't you let Maria come stay with us for a while? Your father and I would love to have her." But before Victor could answer, Veronica spoke up. "Mrs. Johnson, that's very kind of you," Veronica said, "but Maria has been through so much change already. She needs stability and familiar surroundings. I've been living here and taking care of her for over a year now. Maybe it would be better if I stayed to help Victor through this difficult time." Victor looked at Veronica with grateful eyes. "Veronica is right," he said. "Maria is comfortable with her and I don't think I can handle being alone right now." Mrs. Johnson looked uncertain. Something about the way Veronica had quickly volunteered to stay made her feel uneasy. But Victor seemed to need the support, and little Maria did seem attached to Veronica. "Well," Mrs. Johnson said finally, "if that's what you think is best. But please call us if you need anything at all." And so Veronica secured her position in the house permanently. Over the next few weeks, Veronica played her role perfectly. She cooked Victor's favorite meals, kept the house spotless, and took care of Maria while Victor tried to cope with his grief. But now that Grace was gone, Veronica began to show her true feelings toward the little girl. When Victor was at work, Veronica would give Maria only small portions of food at mealtimes. "You need to learn not to be greedy," Veronica would tell the confused 4-year-old. "Your mother spoiled you too much." Maria didn't understand why Aunt Veronica was being mean to her. She missed her mother terribly and wanted comfort, but instead of hugs and kisses, she got cold stares and harsh words. "Daddy?" Maria would run to Victor when he came home from work, tears in her eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Victor would ask, picking up his daughter. But when Maria tried to explain that she was hungry or that Aunt Veronica had been mean to her, Veronica would quickly interrupt. "Poor little thing," Veronica would say with fake sympathy. She's been missing her mother all day. I've been trying to comfort her, but you know how children can be when they're grieving. Victor, lost in his own grief, would nod and assume that Maria was just having a hard time adjusting to life without Grace. As the months passed, Victor began to depend on Veronica even more. She was always there when he needed someone to talk to. She listened to his memories of Grace without getting jealous or upset. She took care of all the household responsibilities that Grace used to handle. I don't know what I would do without you, Victor told Veronica one evening as they sat together in the living room after Maria had gone to bed. You've been such a lifeline for both Maria and me. Veronica moved closer to Victor on the couch. Victor, you and Maria mean everything to me, she said softly. Grace was my best friend, and taking care of her family feels like the most important thing I could ever do. Victor looked into Veronica's eyes and saw what he thought was genuine love and devotion. What he didn't see was the cold calculation behind her caring words. That night, Veronica lay in her bed, the guest room that had become her permanent residence, and smiled in the darkness. Victor was becoming emotionally dependent on her. Soon she would make her next move. But first she had to make sure that little Maria would never be a problem. The next morning, while Victor was at work, Veronica sat Maria down at the kitchen table for what she called a very important talk. Maria, now 5 years old, sat quietly in her chair, her little legs swinging back and forth. She still didn't understand why her mommy had gone away and why Aunt Veronica seemed so different now. Maria, Veronica said, her voice stern and cold, now that your mother is gone, things are going to change in this house. Do you understand? Maria nodded, though she didn't really understand what Veronica meant. From now on, you will do exactly what I tell you to do, Veronica continued. You will eat what I give you when I give it to you. You will clean up after yourself. And most importantly, you will never, ever tell your father that I've been mean to you. Do you know why? Maria shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. Because if you tell your daddy lies about me, something very bad will happen, Veronica said, leaning closer to the frightened child. Your daddy loves me now and he needs me to take care of both of you. If you make him think I'm not a good person, he might send me away. And then who would take care of you? Maria's bottom lip began to tremble. Grandma and Grandpa? No, Veronica said sharply. Your daddy would have to send you away to live with strangers who don't love you. Is that what you want? No, Maria whispered, tears starting to fall down her cheeks. Good girl, Veronica said, her voice becoming sweet again. Now, are you going to be a good little girl and do everything Aunt Veronica tells you? Maria nodded quickly, too scared to do anything else. Excellent. Veronica smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Now go clean up your room. And remember, if you tell your daddy anything bad about me, you'll be in very big trouble. From that day forward, Maria's life became a nightmare. When Victor was at work, Veronica would make the little girl do chores that were too big for someone her age. Maria had to wash dishes while standing on a chair, mop the floors with a mop that was taller than she was, and fold laundry that was too heavy for her small arms. If Maria made even the smallest mistake, Veronica would punish her by not giving her lunch or dinner. Clumsy girls who can't do their work properly don't deserve to eat, Veronica would say coldly when Maria's stomach growled with hunger. But whenever Victor came home, Veronica would quickly transform back into the loving, caring woman he thought she was. How was my little princess today? Victor would ask, scooping Maria up in his arms. She was wonderful, Veronica would lie with a bright smile. We had such a good day together, didn't we, Maria? Maria would look at Veronica's warning expression and nod silently, too afraid to tell her father the truth. As winter turned to spring and spring turned to summer, Victor's grief began to soften. He started smiling more often and laughing at Veronica's jokes. He began to notice how beautiful she looked when she cooked dinner or how gracefully she moved around the house. Veronica, of course, noticed this change in Victor immediately. She had been waiting for this moment for months. She started wearing prettier dresses and styling her hair in ways that she knew Victor found attractive. She would accidentally brush against him when she served his coffee or let her hand linger on his shoulder when she asked how his day had been. One evening in July, almost 6 months after Grace's death, Victor and Veronica were sitting on the porch after Maria had gone to bed. The summer air was warm and fireflies were dancing in the garden that Grace had once loved so much. It's hard to believe Grace has been gone for half a year, Victor said quietly, staring out at the garden. She would want you to be happy, Victor, Veronica said softly, moving her chair closer to his. Grace loved you so much. She wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone and sad. Victor turned to look at Veronica, really look at her, for the first time since Grace had died. He saw her pretty face, her caring eyes, and her gentle smile. He remembered how she had taken care of his family during the darkest time of his life. "Veronica," Victor said hesitantly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course," Veronica replied, though her heart was racing with excitement. Do you think Grace would be upset if I started to have feelings for someone else?" Veronica reached over and took Victor's hand in hers. "Victor, Grace was my best friend and I know her heart better than anyone. She would want you to find love again. She would want Maria to have a mother figure who truly cares about her." Victor squeezed Veronica's hand. "And do you think you could ever see yourself as more than just a friend to me?" This was the moment Veronica had been dreaming about for years. Finally, Victor was asking her to be more than just the helpful friend. Finally, he was choosing her. "Victor," she whispered, "I have cared about you for so long. I stayed here not just because I wanted to help, but because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you and Maria." That night, under the stars in Grace's garden, Victor kissed Veronica for the first time. And as their lips met, Veronica felt like she had finally won the greatest prize of her life. But upstairs in her bedroom, little Maria had heard their voices through her open window. She pressed her face against the glass and watched her father kissing the woman who had been so cruel to her. Maria didn't understand what was happening, but she felt a deep sadness in her heart. It felt like her mommy was being forgotten, replaced by someone who pretended to be nice but was actually very mean. That night, Maria cried herself to sleep, not knowing that her life was about to become much, much worse. The next morning, Veronica woke up feeling like she was floating on air. Victor had kissed her. Victor had feelings for her. Everything she had dreamed about for years was finally coming true. But when she came downstairs to make breakfast, she found Maria sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her with sad, knowing eyes. "Good morning, Maria," Veronica said cheerfully, but there was a warning tone in her voice. "I saw you kissing Daddy," Maria said quietly. Veronica's cheerful expression disappeared immediately. She walked over to Maria and crouched down so they were eye to eye. "And what exactly do you think you saw, little girl?" Veronica asked, her voice dangerously low. "You were kissing Daddy in Mommy's garden," Maria repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Veronica grabbed Maria's arm, not hard enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to hurt. "Listen to me very carefully," Veronica hissed. "Your daddy kissed me because he loves me now. Your mommy is gone and she's never coming back. I'm going to be your new mommy whether you like it or not. And if you ever try to come between your daddy and me, I will make your life so miserable that you'll wish you had never been born. Do you understand me?" Maria nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. "Stop crying," Veronica commanded. "Your daddy will be downstairs soon, and you're going to smile and act happy about everything. If he asks you any questions, you're going to tell him how excited you are that I might become your new mommy." When Victor came downstairs for breakfast 10 minutes later, he found Veronica humming happily while she cooked eggs, and Maria sitting quietly at the table, trying her best to smile. "Good morning, my beautiful girls," Victor said, kissing Veronica on the cheek and ruffling Maria's hair. "Good morning, Victor," Veronica replied sweetly. "I was just telling Maria about how happy we are that things are changing in our family." Victor looked at his daughter hopefully. "And how do you feel about that, sweetheart?" Maria glanced quickly at Veronica, who was staring at her with a warning look, then forced herself to smile bigger. "I'm happy, Daddy," Maria lied. Over the next several months, Victor and Veronica's relationship grew stronger. They went on dates to nice restaurants while Maria stayed with babysitters. They took romantic walks in the park where Victor had proposed to Grace. They even took a weekend trip to a nearby city, leaving Maria with Victor's parents. To everyone who knew them, Victor and Veronica seemed like the perfect couple. Victor appeared happier than he had been since Grace died, and Veronica was the picture of a devoted partner and stepmother. But the truth was very different. Every day that Victor was at work, Veronica made Maria's life a living hell. The chores became harder and the punishments became crueler. "If you don't scrub this bathtub until it's spotless, you won't get any dinner tonight," Veronica would say, handing 5-year-old Maria a scrub brush and harsh chemicals. When Maria's small hands couldn't grip the heavy cleaning supplies properly, or when she couldn't reach high enough to clean everything perfectly, Veronica would scream at her. "You're just as useless as your dead mother," Veronica would shout. "No wonder she got so sick, she was weak just like you." These words cut Maria deeper than any physical punishment could have. She missed her mother desperately, and hearing Veronica say cruel things about Grace made Maria's heart break over and over again. The worst part was that Maria couldn't tell anyone what was happening to her. Veronica had made sure of that by constantly reminding her of the consequences. "If you tell your daddy or your grandparents or anyone else about our little talks, I'll tell them that you're a liar," Veronica would threaten. "Who do you think they'll believe? Me, the woman who takes such good care of you and your daddy? Or you, a little girl who's probably just confused and missing her mommy?" Maria began to lose weight because Veronica was giving her smaller and smaller portions of food. Dark circles appeared under her eyes because she was working so hard and sleeping so little. She became quiet and withdrawn, rarely playing or laughing like other children her age. Victor noticed these changes, but whenever he asked Veronica about them, she had a ready explanation. "She's still grieving her mother," Veronica would say with fake concern. "And she's been acting out a little bit lately. I think she's testing boundaries because she's confused about our new family dynamic. Maybe we should take her to see a counselor," Victor suggested one day. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Veronica quickly replied. "Children are resilient. She just needs time and patience. Too many changes too quickly might make her feel even more unstable." Victor trusted Veronica's judgment completely. After all, she had been so wonderful during the most difficult period of his life. She had taken care of both him and Maria with such love and dedication. How could he doubt her now? As Christmas approached, Victor made a decision that would seal Maria's fate forever. On Christmas Eve, after Maria had gone to bed, Victor got down on one knee in front of the fireplace and pulled out a beautiful diamond ring. "Veronica," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "you saved my life when I thought I had lost everything. You've been a mother to Maria and a partner to me in every way. Will you marry me?" Veronica gasped and covered her mouth with her hands, just as Grace had done years earlier. But unlike Grace's tears of pure joy, Veronica's tears were tears of triumph. "Yes," she cried. "Yes, Victor, I will marry you." As Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, Veronica thought about how perfectly everything had worked out. She had eliminated Grace, won Victor's heart, and soon she would legally become Mrs. Victor Johnson. There was just one problem left to solve. Maria? But Veronica had plans for dealing with that problem too. The engagement was announced to both families on Christmas Day. Victor's parents were surprised by how quickly their son had moved on, but they were happy to see him smiling again. They welcomed Veronica warmly and began making plans for the wedding. "We're so grateful for everything you've done for Victor and Maria," Mrs. Johnson told Veronica as they sat in the living room, watching Victor play with Maria near the Christmas tree. "You've been such a blessing to our family." "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson," Veronica replied with a perfect smile. "Victor and Maria mean everything to me. I just want to give them the loving family they deserve." But Mrs. Johnson couldn't help but notice how quiet and thin Maria had become. The little girl who used to run around laughing and playing was now sitting quietly in the corner, barely touching her Christmas cookies. "Maria seems a bit withdrawn lately," Mrs. Johnson mentioned quietly to Veronica. "Is she having a hard time adjusting to everything?" "She's still processing her mother's death," Veronica explained with fake concern. "Some days are better than others. But she's getting more comfortable with the idea of me becoming her new mother. Aren't you, sweetie?" Maria looked up when she heard her name and saw Veronica staring at her with that familiar warning expression. "Yes," Maria said softly. "I'm happy." But Mrs. Johnson had raised children of her own, and something about Maria's forced smile didn't feel genuine. However, she decided not to push the matter. After all, Veronica was the one living with Maria every day. Surely she would know what was best for the child. After the holidays, Victor and Veronica began planning their wedding for the following summer. Victor wanted to give Maria plenty of time to adjust to the idea of having a new mother, not knowing that his delay was giving Veronica more time to break his daughter's spirit completely. With the engagement now official, Veronica felt even more secure in her position. She no longer had to pretend to be as careful with Maria. The abuse escalated dramatically. Veronica began hitting Maria for the smallest mistakes. If Maria spilled even a drop of water while washing dishes, Veronica would slap her across the face. If Maria didn't fold the towels exactly the way Veronica wanted, she would grab Maria's arm and squeeze until it hurt. "You're worthless, just like your mother was," Veronica would hiss while Maria cried. At least she had the decency to die and get out of everyone's way. The physical abuse was terrible, but the emotional cruelty was even worse. Veronica knew exactly how to hurt Maria the most by attacking the memory of Grace. "Your mother didn't really love you," Veronica would tell the 6-year-old. "If she had loved you, she would have fought harder to stay alive. She gave up because she was tired of taking care of a bratty little girl like you. Maria would sob and beg Veronica to stop saying such horrible things, but Veronica would only laugh. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Veronica would say coldly. Well, you better get used to it because I'm going to be your mother now, whether you like it or not. The food restrictions became more severe. Some days, Veronica would give Maria nothing but a piece of bread and a glass of water. Other days she would give Maria nothing at all. Fat little girls who can't do their chores properly don't deserve to eat, Veronica would say, even though Maria was becoming dangerously thin. Maria began having nightmares every night. She would wake up crying and calling for her mother, only to remember that Grace was gone forever and that the woman who was supposed to take care of her was the same person who was hurting her. By spring, Maria had become a shadow of her former self. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, she moved carefully and quietly around the house, and she seemed to live in constant fear. Victor noticed these changes but still trusted Veronica's explanations. She's been having some behavioral issues, Veronica would tell Victor with a sad shake of her head. I've been trying to discipline her gently, but she's been testing boundaries. I think she's acting out because she's nervous about the wedding. Maybe we should postpone the wedding, Victor suggested, worried about his daughter. Give her more time to adjust. No, Veronica said quickly, then softened her tone. I don't think that's the right approach. She needs stability and consistency. Once we're officially married and she sees that our family is permanent, she'll settle down. Victor wanted to believe that Veronica was right. He wanted to trust that the woman he loved was doing everything possible to help his daughter heal. But deep down, a tiny voice in his head was starting to whisper that something wasn't right. The final straw came on a hot day in June, just 2 months before the wedding. Victor had left work early because he wasn't feeling well. Instead of calling to let Veronica know he was coming home, he decided to surprise her and Maria. As he pulled into his driveway, he heard something that made his blood run cold. From inside the house, he could hear Veronica screaming at the top of her lungs. If you don't mop this floor right now, I'll get rid of you just like I get rid of your useless mother. Veronica's voice echoed through the walls. Victor froze in his car, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Had he heard that correctly? Had Veronica just said what he thought she said? He quietly got out of his car and crept closer to the front door, which was slightly open to let in the summer breeze. Please, Aunt Veronica, I'm trying my best, he heard Maria's small voice pleading through tears. Your best isn't good enough. Veronica screamed back. You're just as pathetic as Grace was. She was so vulnerable, he kept slipping the substance into her tea every night, and nobody noticed until it was too late. Victor's entire world came crashing down around him. He grabbed onto the doorframe to steady himself as the horrible truth hit him like a physical blow. Veronica had murdered Grace. His beloved wife hadn't died from illness. Her own best friend had betrayed her. Inside the house, Veronica continued her terrifying rant, not knowing that Victor was listening to every word. Do you know how easily I got rid of your mother? Veronica laughed cruelly. She trusted me completely. She drank that tea night after night, never suspecting that her best friend was secretly destroying her. And the best part? Your father will never know the truth because I'll make sure you never tell him. But why? Maria sobbed. Why did you hurt Mommy? She loved you. Because everything that was hers should have been mine. Veronica screamed. This house, your father, this life, it all should have belonged to me. Grace stole Victor from me, but I took him back. And now I'm going to be Mrs. Johnson, just like I always deserved to be. Victor felt sick to his stomach. He quickly and quietly pulled out his phone and started recording the conversation. And if you ever tell anyone what I just told you, Veronica hissed, you'll regret it. Do you understand me, you little brat? I'll put the same substance in your food that I put in your mother's tea, and you'll die just as slowly and painfully as she did. I won't tell anyone. Maria cried desperately. Please don't hurt me like you hurt my mommy. That depends on how well you behave, Veronica said coldly. Now pick up that mop and clean this floor properly, or you won't get any dinner tonight. Again. Victor's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone steady, but he kept recording. He had to get proof of what Veronica was saying. He had to make sure that Maria would be safe and that justice would be served for Grace. After a few more minutes of Veronica's cruel threats and Maria's terrified responses, Victor quietly backed away from the door and returned to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, staring at his phone in complete shock. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had trusted to care for his daughter, the woman he was planning to marry in 2 months, was a murderer. She was responsible for Grace's death, sweet, innocent Grace who had never hurt anyone in her life. And she had been abusing Maria for months, maybe even years, while he remained completely oblivious. Victor felt like the worst father in the world. How had he not seen what was happening to his own child? How had he been so blind? But there was no time for self-blame now. He had to protect Maria, and he had to make sure Veronica paid for what she had done. Victor drove to his lawyer's office with the recording, then went straight to the police station. Within hours, detectives were listening to Veronica's confession and preparing to investigate Grace's death. "We'll need to exhume your wife's body," Detective Martinez explained to Victor. "If there's any toxic substance in her system, we'll be able to detect it even after all this time." "Do whatever you need to do," Victor said, his voice hollow with grief and rage. "I want that woman to pay for what she's done." But Victor knew he couldn't arrest Veronica immediately. If she suspected that he knew the truth, she might hurt Maria or try to run away. He needed to be careful and strategic. The detective advised Victor to act normally until they could gather more evidence and plan the arrest. "Can you do that?" Detective Martinez asked. "Can you go home and pretend like nothing has changed?" Victor thought about his 6-year-old daughter, alone in that house with a murderer who had threatened to get rid of her. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my little girl," Victor said firmly. "Even if it means pretending to love the woman who's behind my wife's death." That evening, Victor returned home at his usual time, carrying flowers for Veronica just like he did every Friday. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to smile as he walked through the front door. "Hello, my beautiful girls," he called out, just as he had done hundreds of times before. Veronica came running to greet him, her face glowing with happiness. She had no idea that her entire world was about to collapse. "Victor, you brought flowers again. You're so sweet," she said, kissing him on the cheek. Victor had to fight the urge to push her away. Instead, he smiled and returned her kiss, all while thinking about the horrible words he had heard her say just hours earlier. "Where's Maria?" he asked, looking around the living room. "Oh, she's upstairs in her room," Veronica said quickly. "She wasn't feeling well today, so I let her rest." Victor knew this was probably another lie. Maria was likely hiding in her room, scared and hungry after another day of abuse. "I think I'll go check on her," Victor said, starting toward the stairs. But Veronica quickly grabbed his arm. "Actually, why don't you let her sleep? She finally just settled down. How about I make your favorite dinner instead?" Victor wanted nothing more than to run upstairs and hold his daughter, to tell her that everything was going to be okay, that the nightmare was almost over. But he knew he had to be patient. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. "But I want to see her before bedtime." "Of course," Veronica smiled. "She'll be so happy to see you." During dinner, Victor studied Veronica's face as she talked about the wedding preparations and how excited she was to become his wife. He watched her laugh and smile and act like the perfect woman, even though he knew the evil she had done. "I talked to the florist today," Veronica chatted happily. "She showed me the most beautiful white roses for the ceremony. Grace would have loved them." The casual mention of Grace's name made Victor's stomach turn. How could Veronica sit there talking about his murdered wife as if she cared? "That sounds perfect," Victor managed to say, his voice barely steady. Later that evening, when Victor finally went upstairs to see Maria, his heart broke at what he found. Maria was sitting on her bed in her pajamas, looking thin and pale. When she saw her father, she tried to smile, but Victor could see the sadness and fear in her eyes. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. Victor sat down beside her and pulled her into his arms. She felt so small and fragile, like a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Maria glanced toward the door, making sure Veronica wasn't listening, then whispered, "My tummy hurts." Victor knew she was probably hungry. Veronica had likely given her very little food again. "Did you eat dinner?" he asked quietly. Maria shook her head. "Aunt Veronica said I was bad today, so I couldn't eat." Victor had to bite his tongue to keep from screaming. His 6-year-old daughter was being starved as punishment, and he had been completely unaware. "Maria," Victor said, choosing his words very carefully, "I want you to know that Daddy loves you very much. And very soon, things are going to be different around here. Better. Do you understand?" Maria looked confused, but she nodded. "Until then, I need you to be very brave for me. Can you do that?" "Yes, Daddy," Maria whispered. Victor kissed her forehead and tucked her into bed, all while planning how he would make Veronica pay for every tear his daughter had shed. The next morning, Detective Martinez called Victor at work. "We got the results from the exhumation," the detective said. Your wife's body tested positive for a rare plant-based poison called oleander. The levels in her system confirmed there was a toxic substance present over a long period, just as your recording suggested. Victor closed his office door and sat down heavily in his chair. Hearing the official confirmation that Grace had been murdered made it all feel terrifyingly real. What happens now? Victor asked. Now we arrest her, Detective Martinez replied. But we want to do it in a way that will give us the strongest case possible. We're thinking of doing it at a family gathering, where there will be witnesses to her reaction when confronted with the evidence. My family has a barbecue planned for this Sunday, Victor said. Both our families will be there. Perfect, the detective said. We'll coordinate with you. Just act normal until then. Can you handle 3 more days? Victor thought about Maria's hollow eyes and thin face. I'll handle whatever I have to, he said. Just promise me that woman will never hurt my daughter again. You have my word, Detective Martinez assured him. By Sunday evening, Veronica will be in custody, and Maria will be safe. Victor hung up the phone and stared out his office window. In 3 days, the truth would finally come out. In 3 days, justice would be served for Grace. And in 3 days, Maria would finally be free from the monster who had been pretending to love their family. Those 3 days felt like the longest of Victor's life. Every morning he had to kiss Veronica goodbye and pretend to be excited about their upcoming wedding. Every evening he had to listen to her talk about their future together, knowing that her future would actually be spent in prison. The hardest part was watching Maria suffer while being unable to help her immediately. Victor started sneaking food to his daughter whenever Veronica wasn't looking, granola bars in her backpack, crackers hidden in her toy box, anything to make sure she didn't go hungry. Daddy, why are you giving me secret snacks? Maria asked one evening when Victor slipped her a peanut butter sandwich. Because I love you, Victor whispered, and I want to make sure you're healthy and strong. Maria hugged him tightly, and Victor promised himself that after Sunday, she would never have to hide food or fear being hungry again. On Saturday night, the evening before the family barbecue, Veronica was more excited than Victor had ever seen her. I can't wait for tomorrow, she said as they got ready for bed. Having both our families together, celebrating our engagement, planning our wedding, it's going to be perfect. Yes, Victor agreed quietly. I think tomorrow will be a day that everyone remembers forever. He had no idea how right he was. Sunday morning arrived bright and sunny. Victor's parents came early to help set up tables and chairs in the backyard, while Veronica spent hours getting ready, choosing the perfect dress and jewelry to show off her engagement ring. You look beautiful, Victor told her when she came downstairs, and for a moment he almost forgot that he was looking at a murderer. Veronica was undeniably pretty, and she had fooled everyone for so long because she looked so innocent and sweet. But Victor knew the truth now. He knew what lay beneath that beautiful exterior. By afternoon, the backyard was full of family members. Victor's parents, his brothers and sisters, Veronica's parents and cousins, everyone who cared about the happy couple had come to celebrate their engagement. Maria sat quietly at one of the children's tables, picking at her food. She looked uncomfortable around so many people, and Victor noticed how she kept glancing nervously at Veronica. She's such a shy little thing, Victor's aunt commented. I remember when she was smaller, she used to run around and play with all the other children. She's still adjusting to losing her mother, Veronica explained with perfect false sympathy. But she's getting better every day. Victor had to excuse himself and walk to the other side of the yard to keep from confronting her right then and there. At exactly 4 o'clock, Detective Martinez and 2 other officers arrived at the front door. Victor had been watching for them, and he quietly let them into the house. Is everyone here? Detective Martinez asked. Yes, Victor confirmed. Both families, about 25 people total. Good. Are you ready for this? Victor thought about Grace, lying in her grave for over a year while everyone believed she had died of natural causes. He thought about Maria, who had suffered in silence for so long. He thought about himself, and how he had almost married the woman responsible for his wife's death. I'm ready, he said firmly. Victor walked back outside and approached the center of the yard where Veronica was laughing with his mother about wedding cake flavors. Excuse me everyone, Victor called out loudly. Could I have your attention for just a moment? The conversations around the yard gradually stopped as family members turned to look at him. I have something very important that I need to share with all of you, Victor continued, pulling out his phone. Something that I think you all deserve to know. Veronica looked puzzled but pleased, probably thinking Victor was about to make some romantic speech about their engagement. A few days ago, I discovered something that shocked me to my core, Victor said, his voice growing stronger. I learned the truth about how my beloved wife Grace really died. A murmur went through the crowd. Victor's mother looked confused, and Veronica's smile began to fade. Grace didn't die of natural causes, Victor announced, looking directly at Veronica. She didn't die of illness. She was betrayed, slowly destroyed by someone she trusted completely. The yard erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Veronica's face went completely white. Victor, what are you talking about? She whispered, but her voice was shaking. I'm talking about this, Victor said, pressing play on his phone's recording. Veronica's own voice filled the backyard, clear and unmistakable. She was so weak and stupid, it was easy to add the substance to her tea every single night until she finally died. The sound of her cruel laughter echoed across the silent yard as every person stared at her in horror. The recording continued, and Veronica's voice filled the air with more damning confessions. Do you know how easy it was to get rid of your mother? She trusted me completely. She drank that tea night after night, never suspecting that her best friend was slowly destroying her. Victor's mother gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Several people in the crowd began crying. Veronica's own parents looked like they were going to be sick. But the recording wasn't finished. Maria's small, terrified voice could be heard next. But why? Why did you hurt Mommy? She loved you. And then Veronica's cold response, because everything that was hers should have been mine. This house, your father, this life, it all should have belonged to me. The yard was completely silent except for the sound of people weeping. Everyone was staring at Veronica, who stood frozen in the middle of the crowd like a deer caught in headlights. And if you ever tell anyone what I just told you, the recording continued with Veronica's threatening voice, I'll get rid of you too. Do you understand me, you little brat? I'll put the same substance in your food that I put in your mother's tea. Victor's father stood up from his chair, his face red with rage. You monster, he whispered. You dared to endanger a child? Veronica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked around the yard frantically, seeing the faces of everyone she had fooled for so long now looking at her with disgust and horror. That's not. I never said that, she finally stammered, but her voice was weak and shaking. We have the audio analysis, Victor said coldly. It's definitely your voice, Veronica. And we have the toxicology report from Grace's exhumation. She was harmed in exactly the way you confessed. At the word exhumation, Veronica's legs gave out and she collapsed into a nearby chair. You dug up Grace's body? She whispered. We had to, Victor replied. To prove that you murdered her. Veronica's mother started sobbing. Veronica, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't do this terrible thing. But Veronica couldn't deny it anymore. The evidence was overwhelming and everyone had heard her confession with their own ears. Victor looked across the yard and saw little Maria sitting at her table, watching everything with wide, confused eyes. He walked over and knelt down beside her. Maria, sweetheart, he said gently, do you remember when Daddy told you that things were going to be different? That they were going to be better? Maria nodded slowly. Well, that starts right now, Victor continued. You never have to be afraid of Aunt Veronica again. She's never going to hurt you or threaten you or make you do chores or take away your food. Never again. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in years, they were tears of relief instead of fear. Really, Daddy? She whispered. Really? Victor promised, pulling her into his arms. Just then, Detective Martinez and his officers walked into the backyard. The crowd parted to let them through as they approached Veronica, who was still sitting in the chair, staring at the ground. Veronica Thompson, Detective Martinez announced in a clear, official voice, you are under arrest for the murder of Grace Johnson and for child endangerment. Veronica looked up as the detective continued reading her rights, and for a moment, Victor saw her true face, not the sweet, caring woman she had pretended to be, but the cold, calculating evil she really was. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the handcuffs clicked around Veronica's wrists, she finally found her voice. Victor, please, she begged, looking at him desperately. You have to understand. I loved you. I loved you first before Grace ever met you. Everything I did because I loved you so much. Victor looked at the woman who had murdered his wife, abused his daughter, and nearly destroyed his family. That wasn't love, Veronica, he said quietly. That was evil. As the police led Veronica away, the entire crowd watched in stunned silence. The woman they had welcomed into their family, the woman they had trusted with Victor and Maria's care, was being arrested for murder. Veronica tried to look back at Victor one last time as she was put into the police car, but he had already turned away. He was holding Maria close, whispering promises that she would always be safe from now on. After the police car disappeared down the street, the family members slowly began to process what they had just witnessed. Some were crying, others were angry, and many were simply in shock. Victor's mother was the first to approach him and Maria. "Oh my God, Victor," she said through her tears. "We had no idea. That poor baby has been suffering all this time and we didn't know." "None of us knew," Victor replied, his voice heavy with guilt. "I lived in the same house with her and I didn't know. I failed my daughter." "No, son," his father said firmly, putting a strong hand on Victor's shoulder. "You trusted someone you thought you could trust. Veronica fooled all of us. What matters now is that Maria is safe." Victor's mother knelt down to Maria's level and spoke to her gently. "Sweetheart, I'm your grandma, and I want you to know that you're going to be okay now. No one is ever going to hurt you again." Maria looked up at her grandmother with uncertain eyes. After so many months of abuse and threats, it was hard for her to believe that the nightmare was really over. "Grandma," Maria said in a small voice, "Aunt Veronica said bad things about Mommy. She said Mommy didn't love me." Victor's mother felt her heart break as she looked at this precious child who had been emotionally tortured by the woman they had all trusted. "Oh darling," she said, pulling Maria into a warm hug. "Your mommy loved you more than anything in the whole world. She loved you so much that she's watching over you from heaven right now, and she's so proud of how brave you've been." That evening, after all the family members had gone home, Victor sat with Maria in her bedroom. For the first time in over a year, she had eaten a full dinner and even asked for seconds. "Daddy," Maria said as Victor tucked her into bed, "I have a secret." Victor's heart clenched, wondering what other terrible things Veronica had done that he didn't know about yet. "What secret, sweetheart?" "I saw Aunt Veronica put white powder in Mommy's tea," Maria whispered. "Lots of times. But she told me if I said anything, she would hurt me too." Victor closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His 6-year-old daughter had seen something terrible happen to her mother but had been too terrified to tell anyone. "Maria, you were so brave to keep that secret when you were scared," Victor said carefully. "But you don't have to keep any secrets anymore. From now on, you can tell Daddy anything and I will always protect you. Promise?" Maria asked. "I promise," Victor said firmly. "And Maria?" "Yes, Daddy? Your mommy would be so proud of you. You survived something terrible and you were so strong. Now we're going to make sure you have the happy, safe life that Mommy always wanted for you." Maria smiled for the first time in months, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The next morning, Victor called his office to tell them he would be taking time off to care for Maria and help her recover from her trauma. Then he called a child therapist to set up appointments to help his daughter heal from the psychological damage Veronica had inflicted. 3 weeks later, Victor and Maria were sitting in the courtroom as Veronica's trial began. The evidence against her was overwhelming: the recorded confession, the toxicology report showing poison in Grace's body, and Maria's testimony about witnessing the poisoning. Veronica's lawyer tried to argue that she had been mentally unstable due to her obsession with Victor, but the prosecutor painted a clear picture of a calculated, cold-blooded evil who had planned and executed Grace's murder over many months. "This was not a crime of passion," the prosecutor told the jury. "This was a systematic murder carried out by a woman who was willing to destroy an innocent family to get what she wanted." The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with their verdict. "Guilty of first-degree murder," the foreman announced. Victor felt a wave of relief wash over him as he heard those words. Justice for Grace. Justice for Maria. Justice for their family that Veronica had tried to destroy. The judge sentenced Veronica to death by lethal injection, just as the narrative had foretold. As Veronica was led away in handcuffs for the last time, she turned to look at Victor one more time. But this time Victor didn't look away. He stared directly at her, his eyes filled with the strength and determination of a father who had finally protected his child. 2 years later, Victor and Maria stood together at Grace's grave on a beautiful spring morning. Maria, now 8 years old, had grown taller and healthier. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, and her smile had returned bright and genuine, just like her mother's had been. "Hi, Mommy," Maria said softly, placing a bouquet of white roses on Grace's headstone. "I brought you flowers from our garden. The ones you planted are still growing." Victor knelt beside his daughter and placed his hand on the gravestone. "Grace, I'm so sorry it took me so long to discover the truth. I'm sorry I didn't protect you or Maria sooner. But I promise you our little girl is safe now. She's happy and she's healing. Maria looked up at her father with wise eyes that had seen too much for someone so young, but now sparkled with hope for the future. Daddy, do you think Mommy forgives us for not knowing about Aunt Veronica? Victor pulled Maria close to him. Sweetheart, your mommy loved us both so much. She would never blame us for being fooled by someone who was pretending to be good. She would only want us to be happy and safe. I miss her, Maria said quietly. I miss her too, Victor replied. Every single day. But you know what? What? I can see her in your smile and in your kind heart, and in the way you're brave even when things are scary. Your mommy will always be with us. As they walked back to their car, Maria slipped her small hand into her father's larger one. Daddy? She asked. Yes, sweetheart. Are you ever going to get married again? Victor had thought about this question many times over the past 2 years. Well-meaning friends and family members had suggested that he should start dating again, that Maria needed a mother figure in her life. But Victor had learned a valuable lesson about trust and about protecting the people he loved most. No, Maria, he said firmly. I'm never getting married again. My job is to be the best daddy I can be to you, and that's all I need. You and I are a family, just the two of us, and that's perfect. Maria smiled and squeezed his hand. I think that's perfect too, Daddy. 6 months later, news came that Veronica had been executed for her crimes. Victor felt no satisfaction in her death, only a quiet sense that justice had finally been served for Grace and that the chapter of their lives dominated by Veronica's evil was finally closed forever. Victor never remarried, just as he had promised Maria. He devoted his life to raising his daughter with all the love and protection he could give her. He taught her to be strong, to trust her instincts, and to never be afraid to speak the truth, even when it was difficult. Maria grew up to be a confident, compassionate young woman who never forgot the lessons her ordeal had taught her. She became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping other children who had suffered abuse and trauma. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Victor would sit in Grace's garden and remember his beloved wife, not the way she looked in her final days, but the way she had been when she was alive, beautiful, kind, loving, and full of dreams for their future together. The truth had finally surfaced just as it always does. Evil had been punished. A child had been saved. And love, the real kind of love that protects and nurtures and never harms, had triumphed over the twisted obsession that had tried to destroy their family. Maria was safe. Grace could rest in peace. And Victor had learned that sometimes the most important job in the world is simply being a good father. Their story was proof that no matter how long evil may seem to win, truth and justice will always find a way to prevail in the end. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, subscribe, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.